Welcome back to Tanya in 5. The last few days we've been studying chapter 20. Having established that every Jew has within them this hidden love, this existential attachment to God, and that when this existential attachment is provoked, the Jew is willing to give up everything rather than to, God forbid, denounce God or Judaism. The challenge now becomes, how do we get this existential attachment to God to be awakened and inspired enough to motivate me to not do a sin or to do a mitzvah? It seems that this existential attachment is ordinarily asleep and only awakened when one is faced with a challenge. So the short answer is that a Jew must understand that every sin is a detachment from God. And if I understood that every sin is a detachment from God, my existential connection to God would not allow me to do it. Now, we need to first understand, how is it that every sin is a detachment from God? To understand that, we need to understand, what does it mean at all that something is attached or detached from God? To understand that, we need to first begin with understanding what is God's relationship with our world as a whole. If we understand that, then we can understand what attachment and detachment means. And then we can understand how a mitzvah is attachment to God and sin is detachment from God. And if I understand that, then my existential attachment to God would never allow me to sin and would motivate me to do mitzvah. So in chapter 20, we begin with the first question: what's the relationship between God and this world? Now, when we look at the biblical narrative of creation, we see that God creates the world through speech. God said, "Let there be light." God said, "Let there be things that grow," and so on and so forth. So let's think about this analogy of speech. In the human being, I can utter a few words, but the potential that I have to speak is limitless. The fact that I have said a couple of words just now in no way diminishes my inherent capacity for speech. My inherent capacity for speech, if I weren't tired or, I didn't die, I could speak forever. There's no limit to how many words I can speak. So the one word that I utter is insignificant to my capacity to speak. Now, my capacity to speak comes from my capacity to think. Now, if I can speak infinite words, how much more so I can think infinite thoughts. Now, where do my thoughts come from? My thoughts come from some desire or some idea. Now, the idea or the desire or the feeling is certainly much larger than the thought itself. It's got much more energy. It inspires the thoughts, which then inspire the speech. But the feeling itself is much more deeply true to me than a few thoughts. In fact, I can feel one thing and think something else. So we have layers of how insignificant a couple of words are. A couple of words are nothing compared to my capacity to speak, which is nothing compared to my capacity to think, which is nothing then to my feeling itself, which is only one version of expression of me. All to say that in the same way a few words I utter are insignificant to my own very essential life, the same thing times infinity is true of how much a couple of words are in comparison to God's infinite energy. And therefore, if creation is only made by a couple of words that God utters, then it is of absolutely zero significance to his essence. And therefore, God is the same infinite self before creation and the same infinite self after creation. And the fact that he uttered a couple of words to make a creation is barely, not even a blip on the screen in terms of his infinite self and his infinite energy. The takeaway from all of this is we see the world. It looks large, it looks vast, it looks big, and it could be overwhelming. It could be scary. Remember, as vast and as big as the whole world might be, it's only a couple of God's words. It's insignificant. You've got the infinite God on your side. And this whole world that he made with a few words is nothing. Looking forward to seeing you when we conclude chapter 21.